We'll call this meeting of Lima City Council to order. We'll begin tonight's meeting with the invocation by Councilor Glenn, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh, Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you so much for all that's come together, Lord. Lord, I thank you for all the blessing you put on my Father, Lord. Bless each one of our city councilmen and councilwomen and our administration, Lord. Let every mind be clear. In Jesus Christ's name, we say, Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Gordon?
Here.
Mr. McLean?
Here.
Mr. Lowe?
Here.
Ms. Crayer?
Here.
Ms. Adams?
Here.
Mr. Glenn?
Here.
Mrs. Miles?
Here.
And Mr. Nixon.
Here. The consent calendar.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that item A be received, filed, and approved, and item B be received and filed.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive, file, and approve item A and to receive and file item B. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 1.
From the Director of Community Development regarding legislation to place tax assessments.
Mr. President,
Ms. Crayer.
I move that communication number 1 be reviewed and filed.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 1. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 2.
From the Finance Director regarding legislation for budget amendments.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that communication number 2 be received, filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 2. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 3.
From the Deputy Director of Public Works regarding legislation to enter into a contract with Marimore Industries.
Mr. President,
Mr. Gordon.
I move that communication number 3 be received and filed, and legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 3. Is there any discussion?
Mr. President,
Mr. Lowe?
yes, one of my clients that I have had the opportunity to work in this program last year, and it brought so much joy to him, the collaboration that we had with Marimore Industries and the city working together to let these young individuals work. He was so delighted, and he always talked about he got to clean different things, and he was in charge of different tools at that day, and it was a joy to see him lit up like that. So I appreciate the city with their partnership with the Lima Parks and Marimore Industries.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 4.
From the City Engineer regarding legislation to submit application for Tiger discretionary funds.
Mr. President,
Mr. Gordon.
I move that communication number 4 be received and filed, and legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 4. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 5.
From the City Engineer regarding legislation to advertise and enter into a contract for construction of sidewalks.
Mr. President,
Mr. Gordon.
I move that communication number 5 be received and filed, and legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 5. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 6.
From the Data Systems Manager requesting permission to dispose of property.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
I move that communication number 6 be received and filed, and if there's any, authorize the law director to prepare any necessary legislation.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 6 and to authorize the law director to prepare any necessary legislation. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 7.
From the Ohio Division of Liquor Control regarding a transfer to Maurice Cotton at 334 North Pine Street.
Mr. President,
Mr. Lowe?
I move that communication number 7 be received and filed, and the council secretary notify the Ohio Division of Liquor Control with no objection.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 7 and to authorize the clerk to notify the Ohio Division of Liquor Control of no objection. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 8.
From Chief Martin regarding legislation to allow Rocky the police K-9 to be retired.
Mr. President,
Mrs. Miles?
I move that communication number 8 be received and filed with relations on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 8. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 9.
From the Woda Group, Inc. regarding notification of a residential rental development.
Mr. President,
Ms. Crayer.
I move that communication number 8 be received and filed.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 9. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 10.
From New Lima Housing for the Future regarding notification of a residential rental development.
Mr. President,
Ms. Crayer.
I move that communication number 10 be received and filed.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 10. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Next, we have petitions. Petition number 1.
It's a vacation for a portion of a row on East Vine Street at Union Street, petitioned for by the city of Lima.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn?
I'd like to make a motion that the petition receive and file, that the law director prepare the necessary legislation, that the clerk cause publication of the legal ad and notification of budding property owner of the public hearing to be held on April the 18th, 2016 at 7 p.m.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to receive and file the communication to authorize the law director to prepare the necessary legislation and to authorize the clerk to notify the abutting property owners of a public hearing to be held on April 18th at 7 p.m. in these chambers. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Petition number 2.
A vacation for a portion of a row and unnamed alleys on Calumet Street, petitioned for by the city of Lima.
Mr. President,
Mr. Lowe.
I'd like to make a motion that the petition be received and filed, and the law director prepare the necessary legislation, and that the clerk cause publication of the legal ad and notify abutting property owners of the public hearing, which will be held April the 18th, 2016 at 7 p.m.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to receive and file the petition to authorize the law director to prepare the necessary legislation and to authorize the clerk to cause publication of the legal notice and notify abutting property owners of the public hearing to be held on April 18th at 7 p.m. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Reports of officials. Mr. Howard Elstro.
3 minutes.
President Nixon and Council, appreciate the opportunity to present to you the City of Lima Public Works Department's 2015 annual report. I'll keep my comments short. Those of you who have been counselors for some time know that each year we have each of our 4 divisions, our engineering division, our building and zoning department, our streets division, and our parks, forestry, and recreation divisions compile a report chronicling our achievements of the previous year. And that's what you have before you. It may be of interest to you to know that our department operates on a $16 million budget. Of that $16 million, this past year, 10.8 were for capital improvements. about 68% of that budget. Of that, excuse me, let me back up a minute. Our annual, of those, excuse me, of that 16 million, about 7.5 million was for operations, and 8.3 million was invested in capital improvements, infrastructure, building, equipment improvements. I do want to mention that of our budget, 68.5%, or 10.8 million, was sourced from grant and proprietary funds, and the balance comes from general funds. So the point is, almost 70% of our budget is made up of those restricted funds, like the stormwater funds, which is about $2 million a year, or gas tax funds, or the large percentage of that operating as well as capital improvement budget comes from our staff chasing down grant resources like we asked you for permission to do tonight, the Tiger funds, which we intend to apply for the east side grade separation, like the state issue 2 funds, like the Clean Ohio funds, and all the other grant funds that we come before and ask you for the ability to apply for and expend. So in short, our employees, I believe we have very, very dedicated employees. I believe our employees have proved themselves both to help find funds to make Public Works the improvements that we need to do, and I believe we have some very, very conscientious people working with us, and we appreciate the opportunity to serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elstro. Next is ordinances. Ordinance 5116.
Levying special assessments for property maintenance code charges on premises in the city of Lima, Ohio.
Mr. President,
Ms. Cryer?
I move that ordinance 5116 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 5116 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk call the roll?
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes?
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Ms. Crayer?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Ordinance 5116 has been passed by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 5216.
Amending the 2016 annual budget.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that ordinance 52-16 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 5216 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Ms. Crayer?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Ordinance 5216 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 5316.
Authorizing the mayor to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the construction of certain sidewalks for the 2016 combined sidewalk project.
Mr. President,
Mr. Gordon?
I move that ordinance 5316 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 5316 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Ms. Crayer?
Yes.
And Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Ordinance 5316 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 5416.
Authorizing the mayor to sell police K-9 Rocky.
Mr. President,
Mrs. Miles?
I move that ordinance number 5416 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 5416 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes?
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Ms. Crayer?
Yes.
And Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Ordinance 5416 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 5516.
Authorizing the mayor to submit an application to USDOT for Tiger discretionary funds.
Mr. President,
Mr. Gordon.
I move that ordinance 5516 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 5516 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Ms. Crayer?
Yes.
And Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Ordinance 5516 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 5616.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Marimore Industries.
Mr. President,
Mr. Gordon?
I move that ordinance 5616 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 5616 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes?
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Ms. Cryer?
Yes.
And Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Ordinance 5616 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Next is privilege of the, I'm sorry.
Oh, come on, get it right. We're gonna get out of here.
We're all very excited because we'll be having an executive session later, so I'm a little caught up in all the excitement. Under miscellaneous business, Mr. Glenn.
Yes, I got a couple things, it won't be long. March the 28th, we have a human resource meeting with the Civil Service Board, and they back going again because we have one of the members, her father passed away, and let's keep her in prayer there, and they're ready to go. So we will be looking at some of the stuff they're working on. Also, we'll be looking at the temp service jobs and back at the cadet program. Both of these programs already been set in the Civil Service, the Human Resource Committee already. So we will be doing that at 5:30 on March the 28th.
Is that going to be here, Derek?
Here, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Mr. Glenn, I
Yep.
need to interrupt.
Yep.
You said that it's civil service rules,
No, they're talking about some of the Civil Service rules they've been going over,
okay?
and we're gonna be discussing the temp job and also the cadet program.
Okay,
Did a couple-
the question I want to make sure before you call that meeting is, to be on the safe side, can you refer the
All it's been referred
temp
already.
jobs and cadet program?
It's already been there
They've
already.
already been
They're
there.
already
Have
there.
they?
They've been
Okay.
sleeping for 6 months.
I just wanted to make sure. I
Mhm.
kind of glanced at the law director, and he wasn't sure, and I wanted to make certain
No,
you were
Yeah, they've been
good to
there.
go.
They have been a long,
Okay.
he's right, a long time ago.
All right, very good.
Law director, keep your eyeballs right here, right here, right here. I got
Okay,
it.
Mr. Glenn, you said you were going to be short. Go
I was
ahead.
sure, I'm done. See?
That's it? Cool. Mrs. Miles? I'm not going to.
Boy, I wasn't ready for that.
I got you guys on that one.
I had the,
Yeah, 5:30. I'm sorry.
okay, I just want to make sure you were listening. Hey, I had the opportunity to attend the New Jack officer training that was held on February 23rd. And first, I want to say to Chief Martin and to Major Coon, that was an excellent day of training. Even myself learning a lot of things here, and I'm sure it was very beneficial to the officers that were there. And it was not just local, Lima Police Department, it was officials from, law enforcement officers from all over the area. And so it was a great day of training. And again, kudos to the Chief Martin and his staff for bringing these individuals here. I thought had a vast amount of knowledge here and background, in law enforcement and the drug task force, hostage negotiation, social worker, and they even had a couple on there that were senior pastors of their church. So these guys were very, very well-rounded here, and I believe that the information that was shared by these guys, and it was real stuff. They didn't hold anything back. They just really shared a lot of information about how to handle the minority community, and I think it was a great job, and I really appreciated the efforts. I talked to one of the presenters, and they were saying they were really proud of our city because a lot of the cities just get the 4-hour version, which is really watered down. He says that, but I applaud your city for the 8-hour session, which is a lot more details and a lot more role playing. So again, I appreciate what Chief Martin is trying to do. They stress the importance of building relationships within the minority community, and that was the word all day. Relationships are so important, in our community because, one of the guys said, he said, when you form a relationship with people, they will cover you, they will protect you, and they will go to bat for you. They may not necessarily like you, but they will respect you. If they see you around, they see you there when things are not happening and just hanging out with them, they learn to respect you and they will help you in situations. So again, I hoping that we will continue to build relationships in our community because, we never know when things are going to happen around here, and we just really need to to be able to say, hey, you know, we've been with these individuals, we know them, they know us, and hopefully that trust that we truly need to work on, the trust between our minority community and the Lima Police Department, you know, is building. And I believe it's efforts like this here that will get us to where we need to be. And lastly, the Westgate Neighborhood Association will meet March 20th at 6:30 p.m. No More Meeting Place, Chamberlain Huffley Funeral Home. And the speaker will be Miranda. I didn't get her last name. Miranda, she is from the Department of Aging. And her topic is a matter of balance. So all are welcome to attend.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Miles. Mr. Gordon?
Thank you, Mr. President. Counselor Miles and I have been working on a thing I mentioned a couple weeks ago about putting together a citywide day of prayer. And that event is going to be on Friday, March 18th at 7 p.m. at the YMCA. And I want to make mention that this is for everyone, all race, creed, color, denomination. And everybody is welcome to come and be a part of this thing and come together for the city.
That's good.
And the last thing that I have is to be good to each other. That's it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gordon. Mr. McLean?
Thank you, Mr. President. I can't believe it got to me before we talked about basketball. Can't believe that, but, you know, we've got
We saved it.
3, not 1, not 2, but 3 outstanding teams this year in
Three.
the Lima area.
Great.
Yes.
You know, I don't know if you've been supporting them, but they've been exciting games. They've had some really tough ones, and all 3 of them are excellent teams. So if you can get out and support them, they've got some more games this Wednesday, I believe. And if they get through this Wednesday, they'll be going to state. It would be fantastic to see 3 schools from Lima, Ohio in the state
They
championship.
have to get through 2 more before
Two
they
more,
go to
Sam.
state.
Well, let's get through Wednesday.
Wednesday
Then we'll
and
get-
Saturday. I've been to every one.
Sally, no.
Well, it's important to support them because they're at that point in time that it gets down to meeting competition that is very, very good, and they are there. They are very, very good teams. So get out and support them, and that's all I have this meeting.
All right, thank you, Mr. McLean. Mr. Lowe?
Thank you, Mr. President. I was actually going to speak on that. You took that from me. My question is, I guess to Sally, actually, is there any way, while we have 3 district champions, is there a way that a petition could be drawn up for all 3 teams?
We actually have sort of made a verbal commitment of some kind that it was only gonna be if they got to state.
Only of state?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So it was
I think it'd be
nothing
neat all
ever
3
in
districts
writing.
same
I
time.
just remember that was
Yeah.
kinda said.
Yeah,
that
go to state.
It was if they get to state, that because there's so many different teams, football,
Okay.
volleyball, golf. We've had LCC's golf and a lot.
Understood.
So that was,
Understood.
I mean, it's fine with me. I'd be glad to give them all one.
That'd be great. Especially
2 more things real quick. A lot of you know that we have a group over at the Bradfield Center that is sponsored by the Lima Rotary Club, which is the High Octane Drum Line. As kids have gotten older, they have kind of fallen off and might not be the cool thing right now, but nevertheless, we're a little bit low in numbers. We got a great team, got a great staff. The lessons are absolutely free. We're going for ages 10 and up. Okay, so you could be 99. If you could walk and carry a drum, we got you. But we teach the children how to read, write, play the music. We actually, we hold them to a minimum of a C. If they have a C minus, they cannot play. We truly believe that if they can't tap their books, they can't tap the drum. And we stay on them constantly. We're in the schools and we make sure that the lessons are being met. And it's beyond drumming. It's beyond drumming. A lot of things, these kids are going through a lot. And they look at us and talk to us and share stories, and we're able to send them where they need to go and to get the proper help, not only for themselves, but parents also. We meet every Tuesday at the Bradfield from 6 to 7 p.m. We're asking for individuals of all degrees. It's a very diverse group. We've gotten more kids even outside of Lima coming in now, outside of Lima City Schools. So if you know anybody or you have the skill and you are already a percussionist and would like to lend a hand, we're welcoming you. We're opening our door for you and asking. Okay. Fresh off the press, we have the St. Patrick's Day Parade this Saturday at 12 noon.
I think that's true. If it's not, it's next weekend.
No, it's a Saturday.
This is Saturday.
I missed it.
I don't have green. I'm not Irish. No, I'm just playing. Actually, my grandfather was. One last thing, very, 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 very important. People keep saying my voice doesn't matter. My voice doesn't matter. Administration's going to do what they want to do, and we keep talking about working on making things better. Well, here's a lightweight way to do that without even having your name attached. I've been asked to pass out the neighborhood service survey. The City of Lima is seeking community input through the neighborhood service survey to help identify community needs. The Lima Consolidation Plan is the city's strategic plan required for HUD federal funds. And they're asking that you answer these questions about your neighborhood. There's several different ways to respond. Please answer truthfully and add comments because there's plenty of space available. The bottom line is you can go on our city website and you can download this. If you have questions or you want copies, you can come downtown or you can call 419-221-5146 for your paper copies. And you can also call my personal at 419-371-3383 if you need copies. I have about 10 or 15 of them here. I'd be more than glad to come to you and give it to you. And call me and I'll come pick it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. Ms. Crayer.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Just a few things. I also attended the new Jack officer training as well as with Adams the day after Ann Miles did. And I'd like to thank the chief and the department. Not only was it good to see other officers interacting and role-playing and having to work through troubleshooting situations, but they're also warm and welcoming to have myself and Teresa there. So thank you for inviting us. The only other thing, besides all the things you all have echoed, thank you for doing that, is there will be a Lakewood West Boulevard Neighborhood Association at 6 p.m. on Tuesday evening on Spring Street. All are welcome, of course. If you're looking for a place to get involved, there's always a lot of exciting things happening in our Boulevard Association, or in the Boulevard and the Lakewood and the Riverside North, as I am a frequent visitor to all of them, and anyone's welcome. So that's it. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Ms. Adams.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know it's been said just earlier, but I'm going to repeat it. I have to. Wishing everyone a happy St. Patrick's Day on the 17th, and I appreciate Councilor Lowe and McLean remembering the Irish Parade this Saturday on the 12th. I'd like to remind everyone to vote on March 15th. You can go vote now during their hours, absentee. Also remind everyone of daylight savings time on the 13th. We will spring forward. And finally, I have two motions. Well, I have a motion to refer an issue to discuss the starting salaries of the administration and elected officials to the Finance Committee.
Second.
Motion the second is to refer the issue of the starting salaries of administration and elected officials to the Finance Committee.
Correct.
All those in favor of that motion, is there any discussion? All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. And I'd like to make a motion to refer the issue of abandoned tires on private property to the Neighborhood Concerns Committee.
Second.
The motion second is to refer the issue of abandoned tires on private property to the Neighborhood Concerns Committee. Is there any discussion on that motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries.
That's all, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have anything this evening.
Mr. President?
Oh,
So-
wait, 1 second, Mr. President, I'm
Ms.
sorry.
Adams?
I didn't get a chance to comment on your report, Mr. Elstro. Glancing through this, to see the before and afters of demos of the repairs and improvements of the streets is a nice reminder of the condition prior and how it stabilizes the neighborhood in the demos. Is this report going to be on the on the website? I forgot the one to ask that, sorry.
Mr. President,
Yeah.
the 2015 Public Works Department Annual Report is on the city's website as of 4 PM this afternoon.
Great. And I encourage all citizens to please, you want to see your tax money at work and the improvements made around the city on all different aspects, please take time to go and look at this report. It is wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. I do have one thing to point out, just so you're not late for the next council meeting. Councilors, daylight savings time begins on the 13th. And I noticed that spring begins on March 20th, so that means we don't need to use any salt, Mr. Elstro.
Ever.
Okay? That's all I have. Mr. McLean.
Mr. President, I make a motion to adjourn to executive session for the issue of real estate and litigation.
Second.
The motion and the second is that council adjourn into executive session for the purposes of discussing real estate and litigation. Is there any discussion on the motion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes?
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Ms. Crayer?
What did Walter Paul say? No? No.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
The motion is approved by a 7-1 vote.
Rebel.
We will adjourn into executive session.
Long live Walter.